welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I am going to bring up some stuff that kind of manifested itself over this past weekend, because part of what I wanted to do, since I've been hosting this show for a little over 2 years now, is to actually also bring up things that happen in our social media interactions that are on some of the platforms that connect a lot of the communities globally inside of the lifestyle. And one thing that I've noticed is on places like FetLife, alt.com, Collar Me, although that's quite dead now, X, Instagram, fetish.com, all these places that BDSM communities kind of can go to and connect to. The one thing that we all these places have in common is a certain level of safety protocols built into each one of them. And the real question is whether or not we are going to exercise any of the beliefs going inside of these safety protocols. Like if we're going to go into social media, what areas when we enter them and we go into them, are we going to have any personal securities? So when we look at a place like Facebook, we have the ability to limit what our friends can and cannot see, what our, who we can interact with. And this is what's kind of led me to what I'm doing today. And today I want to talk about our interactions and our responsibilities while we are on social media and how important it is. And I want to start off with this. Virtual engagement in our lives has been made possible and has expanded over the course of the last 20 to 30 years, especially now with the advent of social media, which really became more prominent. MySpace kind of, for some of us started that off, or if you're old school, bulletin boards, that kind of was social media. But obviously we all know the majority we are talking about is Facebook. It really did something. Now, almost 80% of the day is, for many people, is spent virtually. Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, doesn't really matter. Now, the usage of social media to connect and communicate with people that we care about in ways that are healthy and that's termed, we call that social networking. Now, we come to another side of the coin here, which is what we know as social dysfunction. And this occurs when there's a constant communication that leads to the point where our real or offline life gets replaced by our virtual or online life. And there's this slight boundary between social networking and social dysfunction. And when social networking is advantageous for all of us, social dysfunction affects our emotional well-being. When emotional well-being is affected, many users experience a compulsion to disassociate from the real world as they find the virtual world full of fantasy and enjoyment and empowerment. We are living through our desires and we are looking to explore our erotic connections. Now, when the internet was created, perhaps no one was really aware of what it was going to become. Maybe they had no idea. Now, more than the convenience for sharing the information that we now have at the fingertips of anybody's real fingers that has a miniature computer in their hands, we start to notice now that the world has been brought close to the crumbling of geographical borders. There really isn't any anymore. We don't, now we can look at a map, we can figure out where something is, we can Google, scroll in and see city streets, and we can look around and see shops. So all these geographical borders that once really existed for a lot of us are now gone. We can take virtual tours of places. The more people-to-people communication that transpires, the more that some relationships can be strengthened and bonds can grow, and more social media, more people do things on social media. And we see this now in the rise of the era of the influencer. And being more on social media platforms has become really a benchmark for living amidst the younger generations that are coming before us. Everybody wants to be popular or pretty or does the best workout, whatever the case may be. Now, either as an activity or happiness or as an activity of pleasure, users tend to use social media for varying reasons. And we really need to understand and kind of conceptualize why some of these reasons, why we're doing it, and what interactions, once we're starting to have them online, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, to what limits our control. Where's the levels of control that we have? So what had happened, and I'm also noticing that I think some people are getting very caught up. There's a reason why I talk a lot about consent, because we get caught up in this history or in this story of, well, consent means this to me. Well, consent can mean anything to one person. You might say you need consent to look at me. Well, just because I'm saying that, that doesn't make it true, right? If I'm on the street, somebody can literally take my picture, say hello, film me, right? There are limited things they can do, and they don't require any of my consent. We are in public space, right? And we have to be willing to accept that. Now, if somebody was to show up at my home, knock on my door, and then scream through my windows or attempt to take photos, then they are breaking the law. And while I'm using this as a very clear distinction, it's really to kind of go back to, this is how we can expand on the furthers of consent and what we need and don't need when we're in public. And why or how does this translate, Chris? Well, I'm glad you asked. So this past week, I saw somebody, or over this weekend, talk about, their life on social media, and that, well, and I'm going to get into the parts that I agreed, they were lamenting that people had contacted them and they were unhappy in the which that were pushing a fetish desire, is the easiest way to say it, onto they were projecting. They were projecting a fetish onto that they would like to do with this person. Now, first off, I completely agree. Unwanted, we shouldn't be saying these things. You should maybe think twice before you hit the send button. A lot of people, unfortunately, do not. The internet now has become socially unfettered. You are saying deplorable things, whether you want to or not, and going from there. Now, how do we get some control over these things on certain places, like Facebook or X or FetLife or any of these other social media sites? Well, the first thing that we can do with all social media is, number one, to protect ourselves, is not be there at all. That really is a number one. There's a reason why I'm not doing Facebook, and I don't have Instagram right now. I have a YouTube channel, but I haven't posted to it because, first off, it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work when I work by myself, and I produce the show by myself, because there's a lot of hours of time that go into this. But I just don't need or want to go into that sphere. But the next thing, if we decide to enter that sphere, what can I do next? What can I implement next? Well, maybe I don't want people to directly message me. Well, does the platform I am on allow me control over my direct messages? Or if an audience or some random person wants to contact me, can I shut that off? Well, in almost every place I've ever mentioned, you have the ability to do so. You don't have to be contacted in any form, maybe other than somebody posting a public comment on things content you're posting, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. And you can limit it, or you can maybe just allow your friends, or maybe people who just follow you after you've approved them, to send you an email or send you a direct message. It's one wonderful way that you can start protecting yourself from some of the unwanted messages, especially when we are starting now looking at the realm of an adult website that is highly sexually charged. Now, when I pointed this out, the analogy got made, and it became quite asinine. And, pardon me, it is an asinine comparison. Because the conversation quickly devolved into, I'm somehow saying, by putting any protocols in place, I'm victim blaming. And then the tropes came out about, I would say the same thing to rape victims. It has nothing to do with the same. These are stupid analogies, they're straw man arguments, and they're ridiculous because they're reductionist, and they don't seem to it has nothing to do with the actual conversation at all. So what ends up happening here is that we don't end up actually talking about what precautions we're being given online to stop unwanted messages. Because see, if we don't do that, and this became the kind of my point of my discussion, then we don't actually have something to complain about in the first place. So we're actually, what this really today boils down to, what I'm discussing, probably is more apt towards personal responsibility and what we can do with that personal responsibility. Do I have the responsibility to, if I want to go on a website that's sexually charged, such as fetish.com or alt or, FetLife and so on and so forth, or even put my explicit photographs on X? Do I have any responsibility? Yes, as an adult, you have complete responsibility. If you post your things in the public sphere on the internet, you have to be adult enough to understand that people are going to comment. Now, this led to the next things that I started pointing out, which seems by most comparisons that they would be obvious. And the comparisons that I started making was, well, number one, if you signed up and you made an account, well, that's great. You read and denoted what was going to be happening in these places, so you have some basic sort of understanding. That was number one. Number two, if once you're on these types of places, you don't even have to make a post. You don't have to upload a photo. You don't have to do any of these things, but you chose to. Now, when you take these photos or you make a post, do you have options? Well, of course you do. You can make your post private, so only you can read it and read it to your heart's content. Or maybe you have a bunch of friends that you're joining inside of the community that you reside in, and then you just want them to read it. You can do that as well. Or maybe you want to just make it so people can read it but not comment. You have a lot of, what I'm getting at here there are options to provide for their security, because the same person was then complaining that they would block these unwanted and terrible messages. Again, I don't condone that. You shouldn't be approaching anyone projecting your fantasies, and I agree that would be wrong. But because if you're going to decide to enter the public sphere of a website that's going to be about different sexual topics and lifestyles, unfortunately we have to deal with the trove of people that are going to be unwanted. We could also block these people. We can just delete their comment. We can do a lot of things. We can report them. They may or may not go anywhere. And then my favorite one is that they were talking about, and they did report them, but then that the people who run the websites don't seem to do anything. Well, that's because they've given you the power, and you've chose to ignore the power you've been given to limit the types of people you want to comment. And it would seem quite obvious to me that if I don't want certain people to see what my, anal hole looks like, maybe I'm going to limit who can see that. Or maybe if they're going to put up a picture of their vagina or their penis and they're going to do these things, or they're, when they're ejaculating or they're having sex, whatever they're doing, maybe you don't make that public. Maybe because you don't want the public to comment. Then we fall under the guise of, but I'm an exhibitionist. I've never really met that many people with this the level of exhibitionist disorder that seems to be permeating certain places of the lifestyle community, but apparently it's quite rampant. Now, if that's the case, then you're actually asking people to look at these things. You're putting yourself on display. But again, you could shut off comments, or you could make comments limited to your friends only. Apparently they're going to make some websites are making different versions so they can have further protections. But it's not good enough. What this doesn't do, and again, I think any derogatory comments are derogatory and they're terrible, but we cannot change human behavior. We can't make other people do what we want them to do just because we're disagreeing with them in the first place. Case in point, as I seem to point this all out, then the brigade of the squad of followers came in, and the nasty words, I started getting called names. I was attacked for my military service. None of which I wasn't being rude in anything I was saying. My conversations were quite clear and concise and direct and to the point, and they were on point. But they actually cement my whole argument by saying those things, by calling me terrible names, and by insulting my military career and saying I'm a terrible therapist and I'm a crappy human being. They're actually making my case in point that if I want to go onto social media and I want to engage in a public sphere, that terrible things can happen. Now, I found the irony in this, that they wanted to go on the attack from me pointing out exactly what I was saying happens. And this really does fall into the next point that I was trying to make, that personal responsibility for a lot of people doesn't exist anymore because it's easier to live in the world and claim victimhood. Because when we do claim victimhood, well, then we can draw in others that are feeling just as negative or potentially downtrodden as ourselves. So now we are creating an echo chamber and building a foundation of groupthink with a lot of people that are unhappy. And if you try to break through that wall with, I don't know, logic, or explain that you have protocols you can put in place so you don't receive unwanted messages, or if you do, you can just block and delete these people, well, you're not popular. Then you might not feel that, people are going to want to talk to you or listen to what you have to say. So I talked about this at the beginning of the year. I talked about attention-seeking behavior, and this really does fall into that line. The real problem that I'm seeing as these social media quasi-influencers, because in some places outside of maybe Twitter or Instagram or even Facebook anymore, I don't really know the most popular places. I think those places you can get deals if you have enough followers. You can get paid money to do it. I don't know on some of the fetish sites what they're actually getting out of it. But what I will say is the following. I believe that the influencers here that have a lot of clout over a lot of people, and I'm talking with people with 5, 10, 50, 100, 300,000 followers, which sometimes baffles my mind. These people who have influence or can say things, they're causing their serious harm to a lot of people with their entitled opinions. And they really are. Because the majority of the time when I'm actually saying and when I'm looking at these things is that they're not saying things that are uplifting or positive. They're constantly, if you go through their feeds, if you look at a lot of their statements, they're consistently negative, and they're holding that negativity hostage because it draws people in. There is an adage from the media and it's or newspapers, and it says, if it bleeds, it leads. Well, what does that actually mean? That means news stories, they don't run with, 9-year-old boy runs down the street playing fetch with his dog because it's a fluffy, fun story. And frankly, we've been conditioned to no longer want to see that. We want to hear about what's going on in the Middle East and the car chase that ended in a crash and the bank shootout. Those are the things we want to hear about. And that's where our life has taken us. Well, when people come see me at my practice and they're asking me why they're upset, and I start asking them about either their family or their romantic relationships or the people that their friends that they surround themselves with, and they're surrounding themselves with an awful lot of negativity, that can be at least one area I can point to among maybe others that are pretending in their life. And I could say, well, do you think you could improve here? Because if you're constantly around negative people, you're going to act in the same manner that they're acting. You're going to be upset, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be anxious, you're going to be stressed out. Now, this isn't just me saying this off the whim. This is me reading from case stories when I was in school. This was me reading or working with people through my practice. And it becomes these same ridiculous notions that when you explain this to people, and I forget politics for a second. This isn't a right-wing or a left-wing thing. These are generally people that are honestly probably very upset with their own lives, that they echo inside of their own, hoping that they can surround themselves with other people that are just as unhappy. So what's their ultimate goal if they're so unhappy then? Well, that's kind of the mystery. Because I can't see anybody who's really positive and the people that they're pining for wanting to be around those types of people. And if all I see is someone complaining, and that you have the protocols that you can to restrict or rescind the type of activity you don't want, and you don't do it, I'm thinking you're not a responsible person. Now that's just me on a logical level. That's just me being and acting, responsibly and reasonable. If I see you're just causing drama and that's all you want to do, well, it's probably not someone I'm going to want to engage with. And yet then their cycle continues, and then we see it repeat itself. So people will ask me, well, why do you point these things out? Well, because I get kind of tired of seeing entitlement, because entitlement is BS. It's ridiculous. And if we don't call it out, it never stops. By me calling it out, yeah, okay. I think, if you didn't like what I have to say, I wouldn't have the people listening to me that I do now. I wouldn't have the people who follow what I'm, at least writing for advice or the things I say. When I work with my clients, I'm honest. I'm direct. I don't coddle you. Therapy isn't about an echo chamber. It is about doing really hard emotional work that we got to bust through, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. Every one of my clients, I tell them that. I'm not here to bilk you for the next 20 years. I'm here to help you out. But if you're not going to do anything to be responsible for yourself, and you're only placing that responsibility on others to change their behavior, you're never going to do anything. And when it comes to social media, how does all that tie in with social media? If people have the means to make their life better while they're on social media by engaging in healthy practices, and they're not, who's really the irresponsible person here? Who ultimately is the person who is at fault? Is that really are we going to start keep complaining about the random idiot who shows up online, maybe or maybe not, doesn't really understand what rules and protocols are of the multitude of communities that have been smashed together by so many of these fetish websites? Because frankly, I think some of them have realized that if they don't pander to the other crowds that are kind of touching on the lifestyle, that they're not going to be, their commodity worth isn't going to be there, which is why, I do kind of don't, I'm not a big fan of what, as far as the business model perhaps of what FetLife has done, but I don't own that website. I don't have any stock in there. So if he's chosen to, open it up to swingers, and you're opening it up to sex workers, and you're opening it up to poly families, and then all these people somehow intermix in the BDSM community or the fetish community, they're not the same things. And if we don't understand how all that all works, well, then we are inviting people in that they don't understand how it all works, and then they see something, and they'll see somebody making a very sexually explicit photograph, or they put up a video, and they're saying all these things, and maybe they're actually trying to attract customers, so it's kind of a bait and switch. But the belief is, when they're getting bombarded, that this is how people actually conduct themselves. If I saw 40 or 50 or 60 different images a day, and this is all I was being told, and then I try to interact with one person, maybe that might affect my behavior. It is reasonable to suspect otherwise, that society influences our behavior. But we don't contemplate that because we want to complain. We want to be the center of attention. We don't want to put any protocols in place. We sure as hell don't want to restrict who can actually comment on our photographs or send us emails, unwanted or not, who, by the way, if you operate in public, you don't get that consent. You may want it, and you might scream to the high heavens how wrong I am, but the reality is, when you are in public, when you are in the public eye like a politician, or you're out on the street, there are certain things you have no regards, you have no rules over. None. And they don't exist. And consent, we're using the word consent to the point that we're actually really diluting the meaning. They're getting to the point by using consent. You need consent to look at me. No, we don't. If you post on social media and you make your post public, you're literally inviting the world to look. And we don't need consent to look. We may not want to look, but I'm more curious when you tell people, I'm posting a photo, but I don't want you to look. Why the hell are you posting the photo in the first place? It's not the first word I wanted to choose. But why are you posting? The mentality here borders the delusional. It borders the obsessive, the compulsive actions of constantly needing interactions from others, so we can complain about the interaction from others. If you can view it in that way, you can actually see how asinine some of these complaints are. But yet, we gravitate towards some of those. And for a lot of you men that are out there that are white knighting, it's not a healthy look. And yeah, I'm going to take a stand on this. I'm going to have an opinion. First, more than likely, the feminists that you're screaming up against, or the women that you're trying to protect, well, they're not going to probably want to have sex with you. So that attempt is actually now in vain. Because the man that they are chasing after, the one who they're complaining about because they're saying he is full of toxic masculinity and he's highlighting all over their posts, those are the types of men and women that we chase after. Because these are the people who are at least confident in what they want. But secretly, we won't say that in public. We'll say it in private. And yes, I have said it. Because I've decided this year I'm going to take a stand on some of the things I believe. I think there was a study done not too long ago out of Princeton where a lot of feminist women who were dating feminist men were complaining because the men were not what they wanted or what they were looking for inside of men. And how does this all tie together? Because these are the other people that come to the defense of the woe is me. All these men making these comments, or these people making comments on my posts or saying things to me. Well, again, I agree that nobody should be saying those things, but you've actually allowed them to say those things. You haven't taken any measures, any responsibility that a place like X or Facebook or Fetish or Instagram or even FetLife give to you to restrict who can and cannot. Oh, but I want to be able to post what I want to post. Absolutely, you can. But the moment you decide to make that post public, or that picture public, or that video public, you've invited the world into your life. You gave consent. And anything you're asking for after that becomes a moot point. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who that's not going to sit well with. When I took this debate public and I put myself out there 3 days ago and I had 112 comments on a post about this alone. Some people arguing back and forth. Some people still trying to, somehow they think this affects me as a therapist. It doesn't. This doesn't take away from my empathy. It doesn't take away from who I am. I have clients that the reason they work with me is because I don't coddle their behavior. I'm actually trying to help them. And that's the whole point of all of this. It doesn't make me less than because I have a different opinion than you. Just because of my job, that doesn't mean I don't have opinions. And if I think something is stupid or unsafe and you're doing it, I'm going to point it out. If you continue to do it, knowing that you have protocols or safety measures you can put in place, that's your fault. That's now your responsibility. You didn't know you could shut off DMs. Oh, you can go here and here, click this and this. Now, no, only certain people can message you. Oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, okay. Well, here you can shut off comments on your photos or on the posts you make. Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, then. So you actually don't want to do any of the things to restrict the behavior. And then somebody will denote that, well, if I do that, my friends can't comment. Well, you can make your post or your photograph or video only visible to your friends. No, I don't want to do that either. So what they do want to do, and this goes back to this, what I've been saying, is this is about attention-seeking problems, they're problematic behavior, and no accountability, and sure as hell, no personal responsibility. And it shows, and it's sad. It's really quite sad, because instead of being places, especially in one side about the community I reside in, or using a platform for social media that can connect lifestyle members all together, we're not showing the best of our community. We're showing the worst. We're showing literally elementary type behavior. I'm not going to do something. I'm going to stamp my feet like a child. Well, if you're going to throw a tantrum and cry wolf, how many times are you going to keep crying wolf until people stop listening? And it's why so many people tend to no longer pay attention. Now, they are getting attention from the same people that already complain about these same things. So it's a echo chamber feeding itself. But even then, eventually the echo chamber goes dry because people get tired of it. They get tired. They start to realize, man, I'm surrounded by all this negativity. My life, I'm depressed all the time. I'm anxious. I'm stressed out. Well, you're connected to all this negativity. Why is that a surprise? But we have moved into this era over the last 5 or 10 years where this has become extremely problematic. And I don't know what it's going to take to shake us out of it. One person at a time, one post at a time, one counter argument at a time. So, if you're listening to me and I come and offer you a contradiction, or I'm not attacking you, I'm actually asking you to critically think. Just another skill that a lot of people are lacking sorely these days. Critically think that maybe, possibly, the very thing you're complaining about, you either A, brought upon yourself, or B, don't even really care to change. And you have the power to change it. It used to be we wanted to change the world as people. And we had to band together. Now we have the ability to at least control and modify some of our lives, especially our behavior on social media. But if you don't choose to do any of that, if you don't choose to curtail what you encounter, well, that responsibility is not on the rest of the people. That's on you. And by you not doing it, and by you just complaining about it, and you not using the protocols that have been set forth, it tells me a lot about you. And probably tells me you're a type of person I'm not going to want to interact with, because your life is going to be filled more about drama. There's a really great thing that I hadn't thought about it, and it really it's known as the drama triangle, and it was conceptualized by Dr. Stephen Cartman in the 60s, and it covers 3 important roles: the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. I think I'm going to do a post on this. I'm not going to talk about this any further, but I'll kind of write about it in the coming days. But it really kind of encapsulates all this, because it keeps what this really does with a lot of people who do the drama triangle. It keeps it perpetually moving in a circle, and a vicious cycle. And it's just people can't let go. It's quite sad, because more than likely these people have a lot of interesting things to say, and they might have some love for the lifestyle, and it'd be really interesting to find out. But we're never going to find out, because all they do is surround themselves in negativity. Just not where a lot of us want to be anymore. So let me know your thoughts. I'd like to hear what you have to think. And I've gotten a lot of conversation out of this, but I knew this was going to be the traction for the day and where I wanted to head. And yeah, I've said some things that people are going to find contradictory or potentially, inflaming. But you know what? At least you know where I stand. At least I've made my point clear. I put myself out there publicly. If somebody's going to come back, if you're respectful when you come back to me, great. I'm going to engage. Even if you disagree, I'm going to engage. If you start calling me names and acting like a child, well, I'm going to do like what we do with children. I'm just going to put you in a timeout and block you or delete your comment. I don't have time for that, because that's not the way adults settle things. We got to settle things by talking. An update on my book. So talk to the publisher. Hard books should be available by the end of this month. That's kind of the target range. If this is the first time you're listening to me, please like, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Hit the 5 stars so people can keep finding me on Spotify, and I can keep the show free for now. And, it lets others find the work that I'm doing here. But let's keep this conversation going. Let me know what you think about this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you actually think that we should be exercising our responsibility on social media so we can make it the experience we want? Or should people, be thrown in jail for their types of behavior, regardless of what we have control over? Let me know in your comments below and your thoughts. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay clean.